The bitter wind of a New York Christmas Eve didn't just bite through coats. It seemed to freeze the very soul of the lonely man walking down Fifth Avenue. Robert Vance pulled the collar of his $5,000 cashmere coat tighter around his neck, but the chill he felt had nothing to do with the temperature. Around him, the city was alive with the frantic, joyful energy of the holiday. Massive department store windows glowed with golden light, displaying scenes of happy mechanical families opening gifts, while shoppers laden with bags rushed past him, their breath puffing out in white clouds of laughter. Robert moved through them like a ghost, disconnected and achingly solitary. He had left the charity gala early, slipping out the back exit before the speeches ended. The champagne, the polite applause, the hollow smiles of people who only saw his bank account, it was all suffocating. He needed air. He needed to feel something real. Absent-mindedly, his gloved hand drifted to his inner chest pocket, pressing against the fabric. There, hidden close to his heart, sat an old, faded photograph of a baby boy, worn soft at the edges from 20 years of touch. It was the only piece of real he had left. He walked aimlessly, the snow beginning to fall harder, coating the bustling street in a blanket of silence. On a dark corner near a closed newsstand, the festive lights didn't quite reach. A young man sat on an overturned milk crate, huddled inside a thin, tattered jacket that was clearly insufficient for the freezing night. Marcus shivered violently, his fingers stiff as they clutched a cheap, battered guitar. He wasn't asking for money. His cup was empty and pushed to the side. He was simply trying to keep warm the only way he knew how. He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and began to sing. "O holy night, the stars are brightly shining." His voice rose above the traffic noise, raw, soulful, and piercingly pure. It wasn't the polished sound of the opera singers Robert had just left. It was a sound born of pain and hope intertwined. The shoppers hurried past Marcus, eyes averted, treating him as invisible, just another shadow in the corner of their perfect holiday. But the melody drifted down the block, cutting through the wind. Robert stopped in his tracks. The sound struck him physically, halting his heavy stride. It was a voice that didn't belong in the cold. It belonged in a cathedral, or perhaps in a memory. He turned his head, squinting through the falling snow until he spotted the solitary figure. Something about the boy's isolation mirrored his own so perfectly that it hurt. Drawn by an invisible thread, Robert changed course, moving toward the corner. He wanted to see the face behind that angelic voice. He wanted to know why the world was ignoring such beauty. He stepped off the curb, his eyes fixed on the shivering boy who sang with his eyes closed, pouring his heart out to an indifferent city. Just as Robert steps off the curb to approach the boy, the heavy glass door of Lumiere Jewelers swings open with a violent clang, shattering the moment. The harsh sound of the door opening was followed immediately by a voice even colder than the wind. "I told you to get lost, trash." The magic of the song vanished instantly, replaced by the ugly reality of the street. Marcus flinched violently, his fingers slipping from the guitar strings as if he had been physically struck. Standing in the doorway of Lumiere Jewelers, bathed in the golden warmth spilling out from the high-end boutique, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of expensive ice. Stan, the store manager, adjusted his silk tie with a sneer of absolute disgust. He was immaculate in his tailored suit, every inch the gatekeeper of luxury, and he looked at Marcus not as a human being, but as a stain on his pristine sidewalk that needed to be scrubbed away. I was just leaving, sir," Marcus stammered, his voice trembling. He scrambled to gather his things, his hands shaking from both the biting cold and the sudden rush of fear. He reached for his small cardboard sign, the one that simply read, "God bless you." But before his frozen fingers could grasp it, a polished leather shoe kicked it savagely into the wet snow. "You're scaring my high-end customers," Stan barked, stepping out onto the pavement, indifferent to the snowflakes melting on his expensive shoulders. His face was red, not from the cold, but from a petty, self-righteous rage. He loomed over the sitting boy, casting a long, menacing shadow. "Look at you. You people always think you can just set up camp wherever you want. You don't belong on this street. You don't belong in this city." The insults weren't just about money. They were laced with the venom of deep-seated prejudice, the kind that looks at skin color and poverty and sees only a threat. Passers-by slowed down, their curiosity piqued by the shouting, but no one stepped in. They simply watched, clutching their shopping bags tighter, relieved that the manager's wrath wasn't directed at them. Marcus shrank into himself, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with humiliation. "I just wanted to sing. It's Christmas Eve. I don't care what day it is." Stan roared, his patience snapping. The sight of the boy's pitiful defense seemed to infuriate him further. "I want you gone. Now. Or I call the cops and have them drag you away to a cell where you belong." From the shadows across the street, Robert watched the scene unfold with a rising tide of fury. The sorrow that had weighed him down moments ago was rapidly being replaced by a burning indignation. He saw the way Stan looked at the boy with that familiar, arrogant sneer that judged a soul by the coat it wore. He saw the terror in Marcus's eyes, a look no child should ever have to wear. It was a cruelty that had no place in a civilized world, let alone on a night meant for peace. Stan didn't see the billionaire approaching. He was too focused on his victim. When Marcus didn't move fast enough to satisfy him, Stan lunged forward. He grabbed the collar of Marcus's ragged jacket, his knuckles white, ready to physically haul the boy up and shove him into the slushy gutter like a bag of refuse. Before Stan can push, a black-gloved hand clamps firmly onto his wrist, and a deep, authoritative voice commands, "Unhand him." "Now." Stan froze, his face draining of color as he turned to see Robert Vance, the man who owned the very building this store was in. The arrogance that had puffed out Stan's chest just seconds ago evaporated instantly, replaced by a trembling, sickly pallor. Robert didn't need to shout. His presence alone was heavier than any physical blow. He stood tall in the falling snow, his eyes hard as flint, radiating the kind of quiet, terrifying power that only true titans of industry possess. He released Stan's wrist with a shove of disgust, wiping his gloved hand as if he had touched something filthy. "Mr. Vance," Stan stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. I didn't see you there, sir. I was just handling a situation. Keeping the storefront respectable for the brand. You know how it is." "Respectable?" Robert repeated the word softly, but it cut through the cold air like a knife. He took a slow step forward, forcing Stan to retreat until his back was pressed against the cold glass of his own shop window. "Is this what you call respectable, Stan? Bullying a child? Judging a human being by the tatters of his coat rather than the content of his character?" Stan opened his mouth to argue, to weave another excuse, but the look in the billionaire's eyes silenced him. "Poverty is not a crime," Robert continued, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated with suppressed emotion. "But cruelty? Cruelty is a choice. And tonight you chose poorly. If I ever see you treat another soul with such disdain on my property again, you won't just be looking for a new job. You'll be looking for a new city." Stan swallowed hard, nodding rapidly, looking like a chastised schoolboy. Muttering a string of breathless apologies that Robert ignored entirely, he fumbled for the door handle and retreated inside, locking the world out, leaving his shame on the sidewalk. With the source of the noise gone, silence returned to the street corner. Robert turned slowly to face the boy. The anger that had fueled him moments ago vanished the instant his eyes met Marcus's. The boy was still cowering slightly, bracing himself for another lecture, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He looked so small against the vast, dark city. Robert's expression softened into something profound and gentle. He didn't see a beggar. He saw a young man with a gift, shivering in the cruel wind. An inexplicable ache bloomed in Robert's chest, a paternal instinct he hadn't felt in 20 years, waking up from a long, frozen slumber. He stepped closer, not as a savior, but as a man reaching out. "It's all right, son," Robert said, his voice warm and steady. "He won't bother you again." Marcus blinked, confused by the kindness. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Robert assured him. He watched a snowflake land on Marcus's cheek and melt instantly against the warm skin. Without a second thought, Robert reached up and undid his own scarf, a thick, heavy cashmere wrap that cost more than Marcus had likely earned in his entire life. He stepped forward and gently wound it around the boy's neck. The warmth was immediate. Marcus touched the soft fabric with disbelief, looking up into the old man's sad, kind eyes. "You have the voice of an angel, son," Robert said, smiling faintly. "Don't let the world silence it. Not tonight, not ever." He gestured toward the glowing neon sign of a diner across the street, where steam was fogging up the windows. "But art needs fuel. Let me buy you a hot meal. Please, I insist. I hate eating alone on Christmas Eve." As Marcus nods, tears freezing on his cheeks, he adjusts the scarf, briefly revealing a silver chain with a broken heart pendant hidden beneath his rags. The bell above the door of Joe's diner chimed softly, welcoming them into a world smelling of roasted coffee, frying bacon, and cinnamon pie, a stark, heavenly contrast to the biting cold outside. The diner was a capsule of a simpler time, with checkered floors, red vinyl booths that squeaked when you sat down, and the low, comforting hum of a radiator fighting back the winter. Robert guided Marcus to a booth in the back, away from the prying eyes of the few late-night patrons. He gestured for the waitress, a kind-faced older woman named Betty who had poured coffee at this counter for 30 years. "2 of your best burgers, Betty. And fries. Plenty of them. And hot cocoa to start." Marcus sat on the edge of the seat, still shivering slightly, his hands wrapped tightly around the ceramic mug of cocoa as if it were a lifeline. He looked at Robert with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly, blowing the steam away from his face. "People don't usually see me." "Then people are blind," Robert replied gently, taking a sip of his black coffee. "I heard you singing out there. That song, the melody. It wasn't a Christmas carol I recognized. It sounded older. Personal." Marcus smiled, a sad, fleeting expression that lit up his tired face. "It's not a carol. My mom wrote it. She used to sing it to me when we were in the shelters or when the nights got too cold. She said it was a lullaby for the family we lost." He hummed a few bars, the haunting tune drifting over the clatter of silverware. "She passed away 3 years ago. It's all I have left of her." Robert's hand froze halfway to the table. The coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down. That hum, up close, without the interference of the wind, it was unmistakable. It was the exact melody his late wife used to hum to her belly before the accident. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of hope and terror. His eyes drifted from Marcus's face down to the collar of the boy's jacket, where the silver chain he had glimpsed earlier was now resting against the fabric. "That chain," Robert said, his voice trembling so much he could barely whisper. "The pendant you're hiding. May I see it?" Marcus hesitated, his hand instinctively going up to protect his only treasure. But looking into the old man's eyes, he saw no greed, only a desperate, naked pleading. Slowly, with fingers still stiff from the cold, Marcus pulled the necklace out from his shirt. It was a silver heart, broken in a jagged, deliberate line down the middle. On the back, faint but legible, was the engraved letter V. The air left Robert's lungs. He didn't speak. Instead, with shaking hands, he reached into his own breast pocket, past the silk handkerchief, and pulled out an old leather wallet. From a secret compartment, he extracted a small object wrapped in tissue paper. He unwrapped it and placed it on the formica table. It was the other half of the silver heart. With a trembling hand, Robert slid his piece across the table. The 2 pieces of silver clicked together perfectly, silencing the bustle of the diner in their ears. Time seemed to freeze in the warm booth as the 2 silver pieces lay joined, bridging a gap of 20 agonizing years. The jagged edges interlocked with a precision that no machine could replicate. It was a match written in destiny, a silent scream of truth lying on the scratched formica table. The bustle of the diner, the clinking of silverware, the hiss of the coffee machine faded into a dull roar in Robert's ears. All he could see was that silver heart and the boy sitting across from him who suddenly looked so much like the wife he had buried in his memories. Robert stared at the completed heart, his vision blurring with tears he had held back for 2 decades. He looked up at Marcus, really looked at him this time. He didn't just see the dirt on the cheeks or the poverty in the clothes. He saw his wife's eyes looking back at him. He saw the stubborn set of his own jaw. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. I am not just a stranger buying you a burger. I'm your father." Marcus pulled back, pressing his spine against the red vinyl booth, his eyes wide with disbelief. He shook his head slowly. "No, that's impossible. My dad. Mom said we were alone. She thought I was gone," Robert interrupted gently, reaching across the table to cover Marcus's rough, cold hand with his own manicured one. "The fire, the chaos at the hospital that night. We were separated. By the time I woke up, you were both gone. I spent every dollar I made searching for you two. I hired detectives. I scoured shelters across 3 states. I never stopped looking. Never. Not for a single day." Marcus looked down at the silver heart, then back at the man who had wrapped him in cashmere and defended him against the world. The pieces fit. The melody fit. The inexplicable pull he had felt on the street fit. The realization washed over him, not like a shock, but like a warm tide. The lonely billionaire wasn't a savior. He was the missing piece of his soul. "You found us," Marcus whispered, his voice small, sounding like the child he had lost the chance to be. They stood up simultaneously. The table between them seemed to vanish. Robert pulled his son into a crushingly tight embrace, burying his face in the boy's dusty shoulder, ignoring the smell of the streets, smelling only his family. It was a clumsy, desperate hug, the kind that tries to make up for thousands of missed goodnights. In that booth, the barrier of class and race dissolved completely into bloodline. Robert pulled back just enough to look Marcus in the eye, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. "I came out tonight looking for a little peace in this cold city," he choked out, smiling through the tears, "and God gave me back my son." Robert wiped his eyes, his demeanor shifting from overwhelming grief to a fierce, protective pride. He placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder, no longer a protector of a stranger, but a father claiming his child. "Come, my son. It's time to go home. But first, we have one loose end to tie." Stepping back onto 5th Avenue, the snow didn't feel cold anymore. To Marcus, it felt like a baptism, washing away the years of struggle. The wind was still howling through the canyons of Manhattan, but the cashmere scarf around his neck and the heavy, reassuring hand of his father on his shoulder acted as an impenetrable shield against the world. Across the street, the lights of Lumiere Jewelers were finally being dimmed. Stan, the manager, was locking the heavy glass doors, checking his watch and looking eager to escape the weather he despised so much. A sleek, black limousine glided to the curb like a land shark, silently parting the traffic. The driver, a burly man in a sharp uniform named James, didn't just open the rear door. He bowed slightly, treating the moment with ceremonial gravity. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," James said, his voice respectful. Then he turned to Marcus. He didn't blink at the tattered jacket, the worn boots, or the grime on the boy's face. He saw the scarf, and more importantly, he saw the resemblance. "And to you, young sir. Welcome home." Stan saw this tableau from the storefront and practically tripped over his own feet rushing over. He couldn't process the visual of the riffraff he had abused earlier entering a vehicle worth more than his entire annual salary. "Mr. Vance." "Sir." Stan called out, breathless, ignoring the snow wetting his suit. He forced a sickeningly sweet smile, assuming Robert was being coerced or scammed. Is this individual bothering you again? I can call security immediately. You shouldn't have to deal with the street trash on Christmas Eve." Robert stopped with one foot inside the car. He turned slowly, stepping back out to shield Marcus with his body. His expression was unreadable, which made it all the more terrifying. He looked at Stan not with anger, but with a profound disappointment. "Careful with your words, Stan," Robert said, his voice low but striking with the force of a gavel. "Very careful. Because the trash you are referring to is Marcus Vance." He paused, letting the name hang in the frozen air like a suspended blade. "My son. And as of tonight, the heir to the Vance estate and the future owner of the building you are standing in." Stan's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked from the billionaire to the boy he had kicked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Terror flooded his eyes as he realized that his prejudice had just cost him everything. He tried to stammer an apology, but no words came out. Marcus paused before entering the car. He looked at the man who had tried to crush his spirit just an hour ago. There was no hate in Marcus's eyes, only a quiet dignity that Stan would never possess. Marcus simply smiles, showing true class, and says, "Merry Christmas, Stan." The limo drives away, leaving the prejudiced manager alone in the cold. As the limousine faded into the snowy New York night, it left behind a profound reminder that true nobility is defined by character, not by the coat we wear. Robert and Marcus show us that when we strip away the prejudice and look with our hearts, we often find a connection more precious than gold. Just like a broken locket finding its other half, kindness has a mysterious way of circling back to us when we least expect it. May this story whisper to your spirit to never hesitate in extending a warm hand, for you never know if you are saving a stranger or finding a lost piece of yourself.